Welcome everybody to today's lunchtime webinar. Today's topic is about creating a net zero carbon action plan. Denise is going to be telling you basically where to start if you want to create a net zero carbon action plan. That might be for your diocese, it might be for your church, for your school or another organization. It's going to be talking about the pointers and the principles today, where you can find data, how to sort of approach it, who to involve, where you can find helpful examples out there. Then over the next few weeks, we've got specific webinars, one for schools, one for dioceses, one for churches, and one for theological colleges. So today is about that kind of big picture of the principles, and then we've got that drilling down into the different audiences coming up over the next few weeks. In fact, these are the webinars. I always begin with our trader of upcoming attractions. So you'll see that in the next few weeks, we have got sessions on becoming a net zero carbon school, a diocese, a church. We're running that one twice because we know there's a particularly large audience for that, and a theological college. We've then got a really interesting session on April the 20th called Preaching for God's World. And that's a different sort of webinar where we've got a panel of speakers from around the world, including Brazil, Kenya, and Polynesia, and the USA. And that webinar is going to be about how to speak, how to include the environment in your preaching, and how we can best link theology and the environment to speak about our responsibility to God's world. And then with somewhat of a change of tone, we're back into the really practical sessions. So we've then got 2 dates when we're rerunning a fully updated webinar on church solar panels. And then we are rerunning our very popular sessions on church heating, broken into 2 topics, one about replacing or not replacing your heating system, and one about, if you're going to replace it, how to choose the right heating solution. Now, it's not a webinar, but I wanted to include on this slide as well. In March and in October, we are running a really good detailed day on heat pumps. So if you're in a role where you need to really understand what heat pumps are, how they work, the pros and cons of the different kinds, how you connect them, what they might cost, if that's something you need to understand, then we've got a day's training on heat pumps, and you can come along to either of those 2 options. I'll put the details and all of the booking links, both the webinars and for the training, into the chat when I've finished the introductions. In terms of the housekeeping for today, it is our usual approach. So please do type any questions you've got into the Q&A, not into the chat, but into the Q&A. And you can click the thumbs up next to any questions that are of interest to you. And when Denise has finished speaking, we'll look through the questions and we'll start with the ones with the most thumbs up next to them. After the webinar, I will send everybody the slides, and I will also send you any links that are shared in the chat. And we're recording the session, and it will be shared on our webinars page on our website. And that normally takes us about 3 or 4 days after the webinar has completed. Now, most importantly, let me introduce you to my colleague, Denise. So Denise is the Net Zero Carbon Programme Officer here at the Church of England, and she and I led the work and coordinated the work to create the church's Routemap in net zero carbon. And Denise is extremely knowledgeable about that Routemap and what it involves and how to create an action plan like that for your own area. Before she joined us at the church, her role at the Port of London Authority saw her creating a strategy and a costed action plan for how to get to net zero there at the Port of London Authority. So you're in very experienced hands today. Let me stop sharing my slides. And then Denise, if you're happy to get your slides up and lead us away.
Thank you. I'm just hopefully you can now see my slides. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you for the introduction. So as Catherine has mentioned, I'm just going to give you an overview of how to create an action plan. As you know, every building in the church, every situation is different. So I can't spell out exactly what needs to be done, but I'm going to outline a general approach for you that will need to be scaled depending on your type of building, the size of your estate, or the size of your carbon footprint. So for some of you, with a very low energy consuming and hence low carbon emitting building might only be a page. But for a diocese, it's probably going to be many, many pages. So this is a step-by-step approach to help guide you on your way. And one of the things that I think is really, really important is the plan is about people. People are the most important part of this, and I'm going to talk more about people in a minute. So what am I going to cover today? Well, I'm going to cover a lot. There's a lot of information to share with you, but it's going to be a step-by-step approach. I'm going to signpost resources to help you, including those webinars that Catherine has already told you about. And each one of those is looking at a different type of sort of church situation. And just don't forget that we are here to help you too in the national team. So me and Catherine and our new Net Zero Programme Director, Julian, and Joe Chamberlain for wider environment issues, we are here to help. So please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. So the most important question, what is a net zero carbon action plan? We're talking about net zero carbon action plan. I'm not going to say that every time. I'm just going to talk about an action plan, but remember that this is just purely focused on actions which are going to reduce our carbon. So at its most simplest, an action plan is just a list of actions to be taken to reduce carbon emissions. So typically our carbon emissions are coming from the energy we use. So we want to improve efficiency and reduce our energy consumption as far as possible, but while still ensuring that our buildings remain safe and that our occupants remain comfortable. And that's really, really important. Work-related travel is included within the scope of our net zero target. So we need to review travel. Is that journey that you're going to take really necessary? In most cases, it's going to be, but can you consider combining visits, or can you do some of the things over Zoom? And when you travel, can you use lower carbon methods? Think about your heating system. When your heating system actually needs to be replaced, can it be replaced with a low carbon system so that we can move away from that oil and gas boilers that are fossil fueled and hence carbon emitting? And then once you've done all of that and you've reduced your energy usage as far as possible, you need to get the rest of it from a non-carbon source. So that might be by switching to a green tariff. And I appreciate that at the moment we don't want to be switching our energy tariffs. So that's something for the future, but something to consider. And in some cases, your site might be suitable for installing renewable energy. So that's something else to consider. The action plan can also demonstrate how you are achieving the Routemap milestones and actions. And it's really important to realise that this action plan should build on the information that you already have. You're not starting completely from scratch. You already have some of the information that you're going to need. And it's going to be an evolving document. It's not just going to be something that you write now and you put on a shelf and that think it's done. It's going to need action, but also as things change over time, this document is going to evolve. And just at the bottom of that slide, you can see a quote, and that's just a typical wording from a milestone in the Routemap, explaining what the sort of things you should cover in your action plan. So now we know what it is. Why is it important? So this action plan is your plan for getting you to net zero by 2030. And by having it written down, it allows everybody to share that understanding of how you're going to get there and what actions you're going to need to do to get there. Having that plan should allow you to have a quick reaction when a funding opportunity arises, because we know that finding the money to do all of this is one of the key challenges. So if you've got your plan in place and you know what low carbon heating system you need or what renewable energy you might want to put in, if you've costed it, you'll be in a good position to respond quickly when a government grant is announced or when other funding opportunities arise. So it really helps in that situation. Also, knowing what needs to be done does allow you to make better plans to get everything in place, and also to sequence multiple works. Thinking ahead allows you to get quotes. You might need to get permissions. You might need, in some cases, an electrical upgrade. All of those things take time, so planning now allows you to get those in place before you actually need to do the works. It can also identify opportunities for economy of scale. You might be able to bulk buy. You know, if a lot of buildings in your diocese need LEDs, perhaps you could negotiate a lower price per unit. Or maybe nearby buildings are having work done and you can negotiate a discount from that. Planning ahead can also help you identify if major maintenance or construction work is needed on any of your buildings, so that those interventions can be timed appropriately or done in tandem. For example, if you're having roof work done, you've got scaffolding up, then any other type of intervention that needs scaffolding, it would be a good idea to time that at the same time. Scaffolding is quite a significant cost on a lot of projects. And having planned all this, it does allow you to allocate your resources and your funds appropriately. So that's sort of like there's quite a few reasons why developing one of these plans is really important. So I just want to take a step back and just sort of outline what is driving this request for you to develop action plans. So you know that back in 2020, there was a motion passed at General Synod to set this target to get to net zero carbon by 2030. And part of that motion asked for an action plan to be developed to help the church to get there. So in terms of developing this action plan, this is what we came up with, was the Routemap to net zero carbon by 2030. And if you don't know and you haven't heard about the Routemap before, please check out the webpage on the website. There's a specific net zero carbon Routemap webpage, and there's also a webinar recording specifically about the Routemap. So in July 2020, we took the Routemap to the Synod to be endorsed, and it was endorsed. But the motion also asked for the things that you can see on the screen. And just looking at part B, it asked for every diocesan synod to debate the Routemap as it applies, and to agree a feasible plan of action towards net zero carbon. So that's your net zero carbon action plan. And in part C, it asked high energy users within the church. So that is every cathedral, every TEI, every school, every office, and the top 20% of energy consuming churches in each diocese to draw up their action plan. And why we're saying energy consuming churches is, as I mentioned before, energy consumption is very closely tied to carbon emissions. So if you're in a diocese, what is in scope? What should your net zero carbon action plan cover? So it should cover your structures. That's your governance, your leadership, and your policies. How can you amend those to drive carbon reduction activities? For example, does your work travel policy promote car sharing and public transport? Does the expenses policy pay for carrying a passenger if someone is doing a car share? Should cover your bishop mission orders, your offices, housing, schools, work-related travel. That's travel that's paid for by the church. You should also think about the areas where you've got influence, which is the churches, cathedrals, and your colleges. And to know exactly what is within scope of the net zero carbon target, review the appendix in the Routemap. And if you're here representing a building, what is in scope for you? Well, it's basically the energy that you use to run your building, whatever form of energy that takes. It's also the energy that you use in any associated buildings. So, for example, if you're here from a church, it would cover your church hall, but not your vicarage. It covers the whole cathedral precinct. It covers all the buildings on a school estate and so on. But if you do have tenants, you can exclude that if you are able to either approximate or measure what their energy consumption is. And you would need to detail that in your plan as well. And for all the buildings and dioceses, it covers your work-related travel where applicable. And again, if you look at the Routemap appendix, that's going to tell you what the scope is. So to help you with developing your plan, you can apply the principles that the Net Zero Committee used to guide our work in developing the Routemap. And so referring back to these should help you guide your work as well. There are 7 headlines on the slide. I'm not going to go through them, but you can see them there. And there's more detail on each of those in section 3 of the Routemap document. So where are you going to start? Well, the most important thing is to identify who is going to be responsible for developing that plan. They're not going to do it on their own, but somebody needs to be identified to take responsibility for drawing all of the information together and then writing that document. They also need to know who they're going to report back to for accountability. The person who is developing the plan is going to need the time to do the work. They also need to identify when it's going to be completed by. Having that deadline set is really important. But even the smallest building, you're going to need help from others, probably. So who else can you work with? And I'm going to talk through a few suggestions in a minute. But the more people that you have involved in this process, the greater the chances of success, whilst not overwhelming yourself with consulting too many people. And you'll need to collect and review data. So you'll need to find out who's got the data that you're going to need to look at. So I've drawn together a step-by-step approach here, which is based on the topics in the Routemap executive summary. And I'm going to cover each of these points in detail as we go through the presentation. So it's looking at, well, this actually wasn't in the Routemap executive summary, and that's people, as I've mentioned before, and I will keep mentioning the most important part of this. So it's gathering your team together, working out who can help. Then we've got to understand, because we're going to need to collect data, we're going to need to think about the things we already know about our building, our estate, and so on. We're going to think about maintenance and keeping up with general maintenance. And for some low energy consuming buildings, that might be all you need to document. We're going to look at how you reduce your energy, so thinking about energy efficiency, reduction, and also behaviour change, the switching off the lights and not overfilling the urn kind of thing. We're going to look at identifying opportunities, and that's going to be actions that reduce carbon emissions, the longer term ones and the quick wins. And then the sort of challenging changes, we're going to plan for those. So those are the things that will take more time and they're going to probably cost more. That might include heating replacement, renewable energy or fabric changes. And then we're going to look at costs and timelines, thinking about how you're going to get your indicative costs and how you're going to refine those over time and work out your priorities. And you're going to consider travel, and that's not on this plan, but that should be thought about through all of the different stages. Then you're going to write your plan. So that comes back to the bit in the middle, writing the plan. And once you've written it, there's going to be a need to regularly review it, communicate it, deliver the actions and review again. So that's the circle at the bottom of the diagram. So the first point is people. This is really going to be dependent on the size and type of your building. But typically, I've identified on the slide the sort of people that you might want to involve. So your leadership team, or identifying one person who's going to sort of be the figurehead for this. They might not be involved day to day, but you do need leadership buy-in and you need a mandate from them. So that might be your diocesan secretary or bishop, or maybe the head of your school or college. And you're also going to want backing from your relevant board for delivering this. Then the building custodian, in some cases, that's just going to be one person. But for bigger estates, there might be facilities teams, there might be a property manager and a property team. So what you want to involve is whoever knows the building the best and whoever's responsible for the building. Then treasurer. or your finance team, they're going to need to be involved. They're probably the person that gets the energy bills, so you're going to need to ask them about that. They'll also be able to help in terms of budgeting. For users, it can be really helpful to identify an interested representative or two or more who can help you identify the issues with the building that you might not be able to see just from the data or from doing a site visit. And then your diocesan environment officer and your net zero carbon officer will be able to help as well, and they'll are well worth getting involved in the team. And then what about the wider community? Is there an opportunity for schools and churches to work together? What about your local authority? Some of those are considering district heating schemes. Maybe you can get involved in that. And looking at what are your nearby buildings doing, or your local college or university, maybe they're doing some sort of research that you can benefit from. So think about sort of, a wider scope than just the people you'd normally speak to. And then for diocese, you're likely to need representation from all of the departments across your institution, and you're going to want to involve your DAC if as appropriate. And then there might be other people who just have the interest and the time who can help, or other people who've got knowledge that will be useful for you. So for larger action plans, you might want to establish a working group, and that's a milestone in the Routemap for a diocese. Milestone 4.1.1 is to create a working group for that. The working group can help you develop understanding of issues, communicate them, share experiences, and identify and implement policy changes. So that can be really helpful. But I think the most important thing is, if you are the person here who's going to have to develop your action plan, make sure you've got support. You'll see most of the pictures in the presentation, and these are from the case studies that are on the website. They show people working together. And that's really what we're promoting here. You're going to need to work together to develop your action plan. Involve as many people as you need to create the plan, and also involve the people who are going to actually have to do the actions, because if they don't know they need to do them, they're not likely to do them. And as I mentioned before, do remember that we are here to help you. So just a point in there that milestone 4.1.1 for diocese is about setting up a working group. So then moving on to the next point, understanding. What do you already know about your building or your estate, and what are the problem areas? It's a good idea to read the action pack for your building. So we've got the Routemap, but we've also developed action packs for cathedrals, churches, dioceses, schools, and TEIs. And these are shorter versions of the Routemap specifically for your building. What data do you already hold? And what do you need to help you understand your building? There is the practical path to net zero for churches, which is a really useful document for looking at a building. Although it's specifically for churches, it can be, the principles again can be used across most buildings. Or you might want to think about getting an energy audit. Look at all the information that you've already got before you start thinking about whether you need anything else. So you will need to think about the gaps that you've got in your data as well. But here we've got some ideas of where you can find data. So your building records and your maintenance plans, those are useful to look at. Also think about plans for future works, because you want to make sure that they are complementary and don't conflict with any works that you're planning for just for net zero carbon. The energy footprint tool and the energy toolkit, this is where you enter your data and it's converted into a building carbon footprint. There's lots of information about that on the website. So if you don't know about that, again, have a look on the website. And that's going to be applicable for, those three are going to be applicable for all types of buildings. For diocese, you are going to want to look at the National Carbon Report, because that's going to be useful for you to report to your diocesan synod as milestone 4.1.2. And there's a link there on the screen. And diocese are also going to want to look at your strategic review data, because that will help you to identify the top 20% of energy consuming churches, which will need to create an action plan. For schools and housing, you might have display energy certificates and energy performance certificates. And for churches and housing, you might have your quennial inspection reports. So have a look at those too. You should have energy bills, and now in some cases these are only estimated, so it's really good to supplement those with meter readings. If you can take regular meter readings, that's really good because you can identify where perhaps things are consuming more energy than you're expecting. But at the very least, if you do an annual meter read, you'll have sort of your annual energy consumption. And also gather together and look at your travel expense claims. Maintenance is really important to include in the plan, as well as you can see the quote on there that damp buildings feel colder when it's cold and hotter when it's hot. So review what you're doing for regular maintenance, irregular maintenance. In terms of regular maintenance, there's a link on there to a really useful maintenance calendar on the website. Again, the QI reports, and look at the budgets as well. So ultimately, you want to make sure that your building is wind and water tight to reduce your energy consumption. So then you're going to want to start looking at where you can improve efficiency and reduce energy. So if you do a site visit, as I said, take along the practical path to net zero. If you've already had an energy audit done, take that along as well, so you can have a look to see what things have been identified. And you're also going to be wanting to see if there's anything else that hasn't been picked up by those. So look at where and why you are using energy. Are there areas where energy is being wasted? For example, are there lights on when they're not being needed? Are they all LED light bulbs? Are you heating the whole building when only part of it is being used? Are your temperature settings right? Some of those are really simple, quick tweaks that can be made to save you energy and hence save your carbon emissions. Are there other ways to reduce energy consumption and travel so that you can eliminate your carbon emissions? And don't forget about behaviour change and ways of working, as well as those sort of more technical things. So it's also then, once you've looked at all of that, you're going to be looking at identifying opportunities. So you've got your data, you've understood your building, you've looked at the maintenance plans, you've tried to identify areas to reduce your energy. So now you're pulling all of that together and working out some of the following things, which is how you can move away from oil and gas heating. Now, there's some really useful heating guidance on the website. Also have a think about, in your particular situation, is heating the people, not the space, a good mantra? It won't be appropriate for every building, but it might be appropriate for you. How are you going to reduce your heat loss? Renewable electricity, that's going to be very building specific and it's not going to be suitable for everybody, but you might be able to do that. How can you encourage sustainable transport? Looking at those big actions and the quick wins. Quick wins, they're actually really important because they give you a feeling of actually having made some progress. It's building that momentum. And also, we want to start reducing our carbon emissions immediately. We've got 2030 as a goal, but the sooner that we start to reduce emissions, the better it is for everybody. You're also going to want to look to see whether any of your actions can actually pay back. So that they're, because they're going to help you have lower energy costs, they pay for themselves in a short period of time, and then you're actually making savings. So things like replacing your lighting with LEDs, and in some cases, the renewable energy. And also some actions might actually sort of help generate you an income in future, like renewable energy or electric vehicle charging. And as well as that, there will be some actions that will have multiple benefits. For example, reducing air pollution. There might be community use benefits. There's benefits in ensuring that your building won't overheat as the climate warms. and making the building more comfortable. So think about those other benefits as well, which aren't going to show up on a sort of a cost spreadsheet, but will actually make a difference to the building and the community that uses it. And then you're going to want to look at the challenging changes, and these are typically the things that are going to be more expensive and more complicated, so they need careful planning. It might include replacing the heating system. You do need to make sure that whatever you're planning is going to be appropriate for your building and the way you use it now and the way that you might use it in the future. So do think ahead as well. And whilst you're planning those challenging things, if you can sort of pull all of that information together, get quotes and all the rest of it, then you will be ready to create a business case. And again, that's really useful for if any funding opportunities arise. It will be really helpful to think about the challenges that you're going to face in preparing your action plan and delivering your action plan. And once you've identified those, also, what solutions can you put in place so that you can overcome those challenges if they do arise? I've put this slide near the end, but actually you should be thinking about this all the way through, because new challenges and new solutions are going to become apparent throughout. So I mentioned before the importance of leadership. Who's going to be your figurehead, and how can you get them involved? But don't forget, we all can show leadership in this area. What we do ourselves is going to influence others. So don't forget your own leadership role. In terms of data, identifying what you're missing, how are you going to get that? And thinking about encouraging completion of the energy footprint tool for churches and the wider energy toolkit for all other buildings. So you've got that energy consumption data that can be converted into carbon emissions. In terms of resourcing, can you get funding for a dedicated member of staff to deal with net zero carbon? Hopefully you'll have heard about the training funding starter grants that are available for the diocese, and collaboration, thinking about this. Can you work with neighbouring buildings, neighbouring dioceses? How can you share your learnings? How can you work together? In terms of communications, how are you going to plan to do that? And there is for diocese, a milestone to create a communication strategy is milestone 4.1.3 of the Routemap. So that's something else to consider. Hearts and minds, the action plan shouldn't just be about buildings and technology. Getting to net zero is part of mission, and it does interact with our behaviours and our lifestyles. So how do we focus on these net zero actions alongside the wider mission picture? And technology, do we know what's actually going to be best for which buildings? You know, not every technology is going to work in every building. Is your electricity supply going to be sufficient for what you have planned? But don't forget that your current consumption will hopefully be being reduced. So account for your energy savings when thinking about your future electricity supply. And in terms of technology, the best solutions really is to get appropriate advice and leave enough time so that you can make the right decisions and you're not just making a knee jerk, which is why thinking ahead in terms of your heating can be really useful. So you're not faced with a heating failure and needing to get a quick replacement. I think the one thing to say in terms of technology though is it's really important to remember that we do have the technology to get all of our buildings to net zero carbon. It can be done, but there's obviously a few other hurdles that we have to get through apart from just the technologies. But technology, in terms of technology, we have everything we need. Permissions, will you need faculty? For larger interventions, are you going to need planning permission? Whilst you can never guarantee that you're going to get permission, the best solution for this is to engage with the appropriate authority early and make sure that the application you prepare is thorough and covers all the answers that they're likely to need to know. So that's the sort of solution in terms of permissions. Think about funding. Where's that going to come from? I've already mentioned, you know, potentially some options might be in sort of have quick payback and save you energy and money in the future, but you are still likely to need to do some local fundraising. So that's some solutions for those. And you, particularly for diocese, you might want to think about pulling all of those challenges into a risk register that you can keep track of those risks. And you are going to need, as I said at the start, you're going to need to keep reviewing this as different things change over time. So you're going to need to plan all of your actions and cost them, and think about timings of all of the different interventions that you're going to make, and you're going to need to allocate responsibility. And there's a really useful webpage on that I've put a link in there, which is about planning a building project, singular, but the concepts there again would be useful when thinking about the sort of perhaps several or multiple net zero actions. So you're going to write up your action plan, and then we go into the sort of the circular review process, because you're going to want to communicate it. And that's going to be, so all of those people who've got actions, hopefully you've involved them earlier on, but you need to let them know that the action plan is now live and there are things to get on with. But it's also worth sharing it with and communicating it with users of the building, so that they understand why some things are changing. If they know why things are changing, they're much more likely to be on board. And those things like perhaps the behaviour change, switching off lights, if you understand why you need to do it, then it's much more likely to happen. Don't forget to share. There's a whole community here, all of us trying to do the same thing, and we don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. So can you use your experience to help and inspire others by volunteering your information for case studies and sharing what you're doing? Just talking about what you're doing can actually be really helpful to inspire others. So share widely. And then deliver. You're going to need to deliver those actions in your plan. It's not just a static document sitting on the shelf, actually delivering those actions. And then I'm going to talk in a moment about reviewing. But you'll note there's a little note on the slide about thinking about perhaps a wider document. So we are focused purely on actions to reduce carbon. But you might want to consider your action, including your action plan within a wider document that looks at reducing all environmental impacts. And the reason why that might be quite good is that it can help to engage your building users more. For example, congregations and students might be more interested in nature or reducing plastics than they are in saving energy, but presenting that whole sort of picture might get more people engaged. But that's not what we're asking for here, but it might help you to think about that. And then this is a suggestion. It's not sort of a required thing, but it might be a way to present some of the actions. Looks at the type of intervention and assigning responsibility for delivering actions. You might want to identify what you're expecting. Are you hoping to reduce energy and costs, or are you hoping to reduce carbon and costs, or is it going to reduce energy and carbon but not reduce your costs? Having presenting something like this is quite useful, and definitely identifying who's going to be responsible. And it can be really helpful to have a reporting mechanism or maybe even a performance indicator, so that you know that things are progressing and getting done. And I mentioned the review process. So as I've said before, it's not going to be a static document. This document is going to evolve over the next 7 years and potentially beyond. So you do need to plan a regular review. Things like how you use your building or the hours of use might change. Technology is going to develop over time. Costs are going to change, and our collective knowledge as well is going to change. So all of those feed into the fact that the document is going to need to evolve. So how are you going to review it? When are you going to do it? And who's going to review it? You'll also want to keep track of what actually has been done. How are you going to keep track of that? How will you monitor your progress against the Routemap milestones? You're going to want to think about who's got accountability and how you will report this review process and the progress as well. So think about how much energy, carbon and money have you saved? What lessons have you learned? Have you shared those lessons? Have you learned from others? And also, as part of the review process, what are the next steps going to be? And it's going to be really useful as well to keep referring back to the Routemap. The main picture there is the Routemap to net zero carbon by 2030, which contains milestones, and it also contains some actions as well. So the milestones have got dates against them. The actions are just some additional things that you might want to do to help you get to net zero. And then I mentioned the action packs. You can see the 5 of those on there. They are short summaries with the relevant milestones for that particular situation, and they're written in slightly clearer, less jargony language. And probably what the main thing that you've all been waiting for is where you can see some examples. So we have a net zero carbon resource hub. This is a restricted access hub specifically for dioceses to share documents with other dioceses. So it is restricted, and if you think you need access, please speak to your DEO in the first instance, and then they will be able to contact me to get admission. So we've got already on here, we've got Wayfinders reports. These are a selection of high energy and high carbon emitting building audits, which contain recommendations as well. We've got a execution plan for schools. And don't forget, if you're here from a school, the documents that you'll be asked to prepare are Department for Education documents, so that you're not having to, again, like reinvent the wheel. We don't want repetition of action. There are some diocesan plans at various stages. So we've just got Guildford's net zero carbon strategy. We've had a strategy presentation from Coventry, Chelmsford's project plan, Europe's programme of activity. There's lots of things on there, but please do share if you've got any plans that you've created, because these really do help others. And then when I talked about the sort of the wider environment plan, the Leeds Carbon Net Zero Parish Plan, again, goes beyond the decarbonisation goals of the Routemap, but to cover wider engagement. But it's really useful document to have a look at. And then also on the Resource Hub, we've got a presentation template with a few pointers for creating the action plan, and that is been designed to help you when you're presenting your action plan to your synod, which is one of the activities. And then there's also a guide on there put to energy saving in offices from the Carbon Trust to refer to as well. The Church Heritage Record contains a lot of energy audits, and the Church Heritage Record is on the online faculty system. And then these aren't examples, but providing you with inspiration. There are buildings that have implemented net zero actions and have been recorded as case studies. And these include things ranging from infrared chandelier lighting, solar panels, heated pew cushions, air source heat pumps, and efficient lighting. And they cover different building types, from schools, churches, a church hall, vicarages, and a cathedral. So there's lots to see and inspire you on there. And there's loads and loads and loads of information on the national website. So please have a look at the ones I've already identified, but there is so much more on there. Don't forget the range of webinars that Catherine mentioned at the start. Don't forget the starter grants for dioceses and larger grants to help dioceses meet milestone 4.1.4, which is to create a diocesan action plan. And if you're wondering about that, full information has been sent to your diocesan secretary, so they should have all of the information. Your DEO is there to help you too, your diocesan environment officer, and again, myself, Catherine, Julian and Joe are here to help too, as well as our colleagues in many of the other departments here. So that's it. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Denise. You covered a lot of ground there, didn't you? we've got 23 questions
Oh,
and 15 minutes. So I have to manage everyone's expectations now that I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them. So for those of you who are listening in, if you go into the Q&A, you can see everyone else's questions there. You can click thumbs up next to the ones you want to rise to the top, or you can type your own question in. And we will start with the ones with the most upvotes. The good news, Denise, is that the very top question comes my way, which will give you a quick chance to read through the other questions. There are 3 in there about the top 20% of churches, so I think that's where we'll go to next. But the very first question is from Robin, and that is about how supportive is the Church of England for the installation of solar power on a listed building. So in terms of listed church buildings, which is the area that I know about the most, if I just share my screen briefly so that I can show you 2 different things. I'll just share that and then get rid of these boxes briefly. So the first of those is if I show you the renewables map. So this is an open web page that you can all find that's on the Church Heritage Record if you look for renewables. And I've filtered it for listed buildings with solar panels. And every one of these little orange stars is a listed building, a listed church which has installed solar panels and which we know about, so that it's made it onto the map. So that's just to show you that, to get that sense that this is possible. This is something that a lot of churches are doing. The second thing that I wanted to show you, but now I can't get at the tab. Let me stop sharing and then I can get at my tabs and then I can get it up again, is the solar panel guidance. So we have relatively recently updated our solar panel and faculty guidance. And when I finish speaking, I'll put a link to both of these pages I'm showing you into the chat. And if you look at what it says in the introduction, all applications are covered on a case-by-case basis. Well-designed and well-prepared applications are encouraged. Solar panels being visible does not necessarily mean they're acceptable. There is a clear understanding at all levels in the church of the climate crisis and the need for action. Visibility is in itself not intrinsically harmful, but you do need to make a stronger case if the panels are going to be visible. And this note, I hope you'll find it really useful. So it takes you through all of the questions to ask yourself, to think about whether solar is right for your church. Have the basics been dealt with? Is the roof sound? Is the roof suitable? And then it takes you through specifically, if you've got a listed church building, the other questions you would need to ask yourself. And then it takes you through what to put in an application if you want to make a really strong faculty application. It's written specifically for the faculty process, but a lot of the information in there will be useful for making a planning application as well. So in terms of how supportive is the church, it is still on a case-by-case basis. There will be some churches where solar panels are still not going to be acceptable because of their listing, and particularly if the roof itself contributes to the listing of the church. But for many churches, that isn't true. And either they could make a strong case for visible solar panels, or there is somewhere where they can be behind a parapet or in a valley roof. Now, remembering that for solar panels on a listed church, you are also going to need planning permission. And we certainly do still hear from churches around the country that they're getting, they get very different answers, I think, in different places in the country. So I'm not saying that it's easy, but I am saying that the updated church guidance is quite clear that we welcome well-made applications, and the guidance is there to help you know how to write them. The next question, Denise, turning back to you, is around the top 20%. So there's 3 different questions in there about how do we know if we're in the top 20? How do we find the data? So could you answer that for people?
Yes, so information has been sent to your diocese secretary of sort of energy consumption from all buildings, and they should be able to work out. It might not be the diocese secretary that does this, but maybe your DEO will be able to identify which are the top 20% of energy consuming churches. And it to answer one of the questions, it should be the net energy. And if you, the problem with the process is that at the moment it doesn't sort of identify whether you're already using renewable energy. So there's going to be there is guidance note on the resource hub for people in diocese who are going to be looking at this, which explains exactly how they can work out which buildings are in the top 20%.
And it's a combination, isn't it, Denise, of the EFT data and then the spending on utility bills for those that haven't completed the EFT.
Yes, it is. And although where the synod motion asks for the top 20% to develop an action plan, if you are a church with a smaller energy consumption, this doesn't preclude you from doing it, because it will be a really useful exercise to identify, you know, where you are perhaps wasting energy that you didn't even know you were wasting, or how you can make some energy efficiency improvements. But it's not sort of not so important that you do that, because you are by your very nature emitting less carbon.
So the next question is about, is there a template for either net zero carbon action plans or heating plans for buildings? It would be great to see examples from proactive parts of the church. So I think there's different bits to answering that, isn't there, Denise? So as you've said, if someone is in a diocesan role, there's a number of examples on the net zero carbon resource hub. If they are not in a diocesan role, which I suspect will be the majority of people who are ringing in today, should I show them where the church action pack is on the website?
Yes, you can do that. It's not a sort of a template as such, but yes, the church action pack summarizes all of the Routemap milestones that are relevant for churches, and gives you a sort of a quick summary of the Routemap. In terms of templates, we haven't created any templates yet. As I said at the start, every building, every situation is different, so it's going to be quite difficult to provide a template. But there are, as I mentioned on the resource hub, we do have the wayfinders reports. So those are for high energy consuming buildings, but they do provide a sort of perhaps a template that you could follow for the buildings that are not quite so high energy as the ones that were identified for the wayfinders. And hopefully the more people that create them, the more will get shared, and we can share those with you.
Let me show you what we do have. So if you go onto the Routemap page, which I put a link to in the chat a little while ago, you go into the Routemap page and you scroll down, you can get the resources for specific groups. And if you go into the church one, you'll see that it's got the milestones that are recommended for churches for each year. And then there's a lot more detail. If you click through here, it takes you into a resource pack specifically written for churches with those milestones and a lot of the things that Denise has spoken about today. So that is one really good place to start. A second thing is the practical path to net zero carbon for churches. And if you go into the self-guided version of the practical path, it takes you through, so you can look through each of the suggested actions on the practical path, and you can tick whether this is something we've already done, it's not applicable, it's not a priority right now, it's something we want to explore more, or it's a priority. And you go through and you tick all of the ones which are relevant to your building, and then that helps you create an action plan. And then the third thing, if you want to see things that other churches have already had identified, you go into the church heritage record, and up here, if you type search for energy audit 2022, so you'll get recent ones, you'll see there are page after page after page of energy audits that other churches have had done. And you can go through, you can say, right, I'm going to pick this one and I want to look at their energy audit report. And then you can read the whole of the church energy audit report. But the bit you'll most want to see is there's a route to net zero carbon in them, where you get these 3 arrows, and it shows you for this particular church what to do in the short term, medium term and long term. And then there's a costed table with the actions. Now, obviously, there's so many on there that the decision would be deciding which ones of them to read. But I'm just showing you that it's there. So we have got a lot of information shared through the church heritage record, through the practical path to net zero, and the church action pack. I'll put those links in the chat in a second. Right, what is the next question? Should net zero become part of the quinquennial report or within the Archdeacon's visitation scope?
I would say yes. I think, you know, we have a mandate to do this, so yes, it should be being included in everything that is done. I have to confess I don't know too much about the quinquennial inspections, nor what the archdeacons look at on their visits, so can't give you much more information than that.
So archdeacon's visitation questions are generally set, I believe, at a diocesan level. In terms of the quinquennial inspection framework, we already have built into that a reasonable degree of environmental work. So let me just see, it says in the QI inspection that it should cover environmental sustainability, lighting, heating, rainwater goods, suitability for renewables, opportunities to reduce heat loss through steps such as draft proofing and insulation. So covering that is already in the QI framework that we issue nationally. Right, the next, sorry, every time I flick to my other screen, the questions disappear. Denise, could you say a few words about funding opportunities which currently exist or where to look for them?
Okay, so again, there's a webinar on fundraising, and there is a web page on fundraising where you can find fundraising opportunities. There is the triennium funding that's been set aside for the net zero carbon that has allocated some funding for diocese. There's a £15,000 starter grant available to every diocese, and that I mentioned, all of the information for that has been circulated to diocesan secretaries, and I believe around half of dioceses have already applied. And there will be a larger grant, and these are to build capacity within the diocese to develop net zero carbon action plans and to develop the sort of net zero carbon capability. So those are that's currently available. If you're talking specifically about sort of, you know, a building, then check out the webpage and the webinar for more advice. There are opportunities to get different funds. Unfortunately, there is never going to be sort of just a bottomless pit that's going to enable every building within the church estate to get to net zero carbon.
How are we doing?
Sorry, yes, just did want to say that, you know, some things net zero carbon is going to be sort of like an additional. If you know that your heating system is going to sort of expected lifespan is likely to fail in the next sort of 4 years, you would have to replace that anyway. But there may be a premium on that for going net zero. Although, having said that, British Gas have just announced that heat pumps are going to have a sort of a price match guarantee kind of thing on heat pumps. So the whole landscape is changing really quickly, and hopefully things are going to get better for us in delivering net zero.
How are we doing? We've got 2 minutes left. We've probably only got time for one more question, I'm afraid. Can I assume that the vicarage is separate from the church? Is there a separate scheme for vicarages?
Yes, so yes, if for a church building, you don't need to consider the vicarage. The vicarages will be covered by your diocese in their action plan.
And then, how many of the following can we do super quickly? Those of you who've got questions about heating, I really recommend you come along to the Net Zero Carbon Church webinar that's coming up, and or the heating webinars that we've got coming up. And there's also our heating guidance. There's really useful notes in the heating guidance, particularly if you look in the section called options appraisal. If you click into that note, then the options appraisal section shows you what the typical options are that work for different types of churches. And there's also an example of an options appraisal at the end of that note. So I do really recommend having a look at that. There's a question near the top as well about the definition of net zero. So that's really well laid out in the appendix to the Routemap, and the link to the Routemap is in the chat already. I'm so conscious of there being 16 questions open, but it is 1 o'clock, so I need to bring us to an end. I will save the chat and I'll be sending everybody Denise's slides and all the links that I've shared in the chat as we've been going along. Thank you so much for coming on today. Like I said at the beginning, we've got sessions coming up specifically for schools, churches, TEIs and dioceses. So if you had a question today and we haven't got to it, please do come along to the right one of those. And I hope that it'll either be answered by the presentation or if not, that you'll have another chance to ask your question. Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you for all the preparation that went into sharing a lot of information really clearly today. And I can see from the comments in the chat that people have appreciated it.
Thank you. And if obviously if people have got questions that we haven't got around to answering, you can contact us and we'll try to if the other subsequent webinars don't answer the question and you can't find the guidance on the website, then please do contact us and we'll do our best to point you in the right direction.
Thank you. And now, thank you so much for coming. Now bring us to a close. Goodbye, everyone.